good day to my fellow poetry enthusiasts, and welcome to our analysis of Funeral Blues by W.H. Auden. Down here I've included a very poignant picture of our poet of the day, W.H. Auden, on the act of writing some poetry. And while I've got you here, remember to subscribe, like, and hit that bell notification button if you want to be notified every time we upload. Down here I've included some basic information about Auden's life. Now, W.H. Auden was born in York and he grew up near Birmingham in a pretty middle-class family. He attended public school and then studied English at Christ Church, Oxford. After a couple of months in Berlin, he spent 5 years teaching in British public schools before travelling off to Iceland and China in order to write books about his journeys. In 1939, he officially became an American citizen and spent the rest of his life commuting between New York and Lower Austria. Also in 1939, Auden fell in love with Chester Coleman, and he rather regarded this relationship as a marriage. However, this tragically ended in 1941 when Coleman realized she didn't share his sentiments and refused to accept this faithful, very loyal relation that Auden demanded. However, the two remained quite close friends, and from 1947 until Auden's death, they lived in the same house or apartment. Talk about setting the standards for remaining mutual with your ex. Too high for us millennials. Anyway, as a poet, Auden was considered both controversial and influential. Certainly his poetry dealt with the ills and social politics of the time, and we'll learn more about this as we dive into Funeral Blues. Let's kick it off straight away with our title, Funeral Blues. Now, a funeral is a very public event, often relating to death. It's a showing of grief. Blues, this one can be a little more tricky. On the simplest scale, of course, blue is a colour. It's a colour that we often associate with sadness. On the other hand, it's also an American term for a sad song, like an elegy, a song of grief. So these words together obviously indicate to us that we're dealing with a tragedy. It sets a very somber tone from the outset for this poem to come, and perhaps indicates to our reader as well that we're going to lament some form of death in the poem. Let's head on to the first line. Stop all the clocks, cut off the telephone. Already, through the use of the imperative verbs such as stop and cut, or cut off if you will, we're coming through with this commanding tone, and I'm going to mark off all these imperative verbs in pink if you don't mind. So it's already commanding us. Stop all the clocks. It is quite an ancient custom and tradition that as soon as a person would die, all the clocks would be stopped. In that household, it signaled the end time for that deceased. Of course, that would allow them to recall the time of death. It was a way in which to mark that exact time and that moment, so that the mourners could be informed when they arrived at that house to mourn the deceased. And, of course, stopping the clocks would also stop the ticking sound from coming through. So there'd be a little more silence, less noise in that house. And silence is a strong element you're going to see coming throughout this poem. The speaker desperately seeks silence and solitude and wishing for this time to stand still. He really wishes to mourn in that way. Cut off the telephone. This is an easy one. He doesn't want to communicate any further. People would likely be calling, inquiring about the funeral details, and he doesn't wish to make this petty conversation. He is fully focused now on this death that has occurred. He wants total silence and to give this all his respect. He doesn't want to interact with anybody. Prevent the dogs from barking with a juicy bone. Now, dogs are often pretty noisy and they bark loudly when they're playing, so they should be quietened down since the speaker does not feel like playing. He's not in that mood or that frame of mind at all, and this juicy bone will thus be a good distraction for them, the dogs, that is. Moving on to line 3. Silence the pianos and with muffled drum. Music from a piano cannot be appreciated. No upbeat, jazzy sounds should be heard. Right now, all he wants is this muffled drum, which is quite a ceremonious thing. Drums have a heavier bass, dull kind of sound coming through, which would signal now the beginning of this funeral procession. So that's all that he wants to hear. And muffled simply refers to the sound of the drum being slightly silenced, almost wrapped in a way that will kill the sound, if you could play on some puns here. Not funny. So yes, that's all he wants to focus on. Bring out the coffin, let the mourners come. So here we see that only after these careful preparations are done and, the drum is playing, then can the coffin be brought out and the mourners will be able to arrive. So the speaker here is again focusing on all of this. And what we can see is, with the reference to mourners, our speaker right here will be synonymous with these mourners. They, in fact, will also be a mourner in this ceremony. Now, looking at the first stanza as a whole, what you'll notice is that here we're dealing pretty much entirely with the immediate response in the domestic environment of the speaker, the immediate response to the death. It's domestic, it's private. So that's what we're dealing with right here. And we'll see a change as we go through the stanzas. Also, a standout feature of the first stanza would be the focus or emphasis on the sense of hearing, the need for silence, and a lot of sound devices coming through the form of music and pianos and barking, and a lot of sounds coming out right there. So definitely an emphasis on the sense of hearing. Moving on to stanza 2 then. Let aeroplanes circle, moaning overhead. Now, here we see a little bit of a change. It's no longer the imperative stop or prevent, it's let. It's kind of a lessening in terms of seriousness, of degree, of magnitude, if you will. The imperative is no longer as strong. However, we still get quite an absurd request: aeroplane circle moaning overhead. Now, I'm going to mark out our parts of speech in red if you don't mind. And when it comes to moaning, we have personification and also a little bit of onomatopoeia as well with the word moaning. Now, of course, aeroplanes are given the human quality of moaning. This makes it seem as if the aeroplane too has joined the group of mourners. The sound of the engines of the aeroplane makes it appear as if even this aeroplane is feeling a sense of torment at the news of the deceased. Scribbling on the sky, the message, he is dead. Now, scribbling, that's a interesting word right there. Scribbling is a very quick act, if you will. So that's pretty quick an act. On the sky, the message, he is dead. So this is capitalized. I'm just going to draw attention to that. Now that's quite a contrast already, where we're looking at scribbling, a very quick, almost unimportant act, and then he is dead. That's a very strong message, and there's a strong capitalization. So there's quite a contrast right there. Now the capital H emphasizes the importance of this deceased person to the speaker. In this case, we're assuming the speaker is male, of course. So, therefore, the poet wants the world to know about this death. He wants it to be pretty public. Dead is also capitalized, which emphasizes the finality of this death. There's no coming back. Scribble, again, as I said, was writing done very quickly, so he wants the aeroplanes to very quickly announce the death to the entire world. He doesn't care if the writing is entirety or neat. All that he cares about is that every single person knows of this death as quickly as possible and then joins in the mourning process. Moving on, put crepe rows around the white necks of the public doves. Let the traffic policemen wear black cotton gloves. Now here again, I'm going to point out a quick contrast in the form of the white necks and then the black cotton gloves. So a contrast in color right there. Now, the bows would denote that these doves are decorated to also join in this public showing of mass grieving and mourning. They are public doves because these are simply pigeons which frequent public spaces, so they'd be able to then show to the world, to the rest of the community, that this person is no more. Black cotton gloves, quite a strange request. Of course, as you all know, the traffic policemen would commonly wear white gloves when in using their signals, but here even this must change. Even the simplest piece of material, the glove covering a traffic policeman, must be black in show of mourning. So this is a very high, great desire for the poet to have a public acknowledgement of this death and a show of mourning. So here we see that transition from a very domestic and private dealing of grief to a very, very public one. And I'm going to mark that out right now for us. Now, something quite different here. With the second stanza, these requests you would have seen were pretty unreasonable. So, unreasonable requests, certainly. Whereas with the first stanza, we did have much more of a commanding tone, but requests that were a lot more achievable. So, that was a striking difference I noticed there. Moving on to the third stanza. He was my north, my south, my east, and west. Huh. This leads us to question, was this person who died simply a friend or something more? Now we would tend to think there was more than a friendship going, definitely something that seems like a love relationship. The poet has listed all the cardinal points indicating that the deceased gave the speaker a sense of direction and consistency, so definitely a guide in life. My working week and my Sunday rest. Now that's quite an oxymoron, if you will. And this indicates that the deceased simply everything to the speaker. He was working days and weekends, representing all the opposites in the world. My noon, my midnight, my talk, my song. Oh, at this point, you must have noticed now that we have a lot of possessive pronouns going on. So, my, oh my. We've got quite a few coming through. And this repetition indicates how important, really, this deceased was to the poet. Here with line 11, we get the sense that the deceased defined the poet's sense of time. And, he was a part of every moment of every day and everything. My talk, my song. So he influenced the way the speaker communicated, his mood, his daily doings. So he was this love was in fact everything to the speaker. I thought that love would last forever. I was wrong. This is quite sobering. A harsh truth, a brutal reality that time here on this planet is simply finite for us all. And perhaps this lover, the speaker, was under the delusion that it wouldn't be the case with his love. That wouldn't come to an end. This person would never pass on. But now it's all coming to realization that he was wrong and this lover has passed on. So there's a sense of devastation about it. And it expresses genuine sorrow that the speaker experiences at this time of loss. And his beliefs have been proven wrong, and he's now accepted that, of course, his beloved has died, and this marks an end of that love. And there's a great difficulty in accepting this loss. And with this use of first person throughout this third stanza, we see the speaker being very vulnerable. So we get an intimate look into their relationship and the time and moments spent together. This grief cannot be contained. So definitely the possessive pronouns and the use of first person has been very effective. Now, what we'll find different with the third stanza is that here it wasn't a showing of grief, but simply an outlaying of why that grief would be experienced. It's just an insight into their relationship. So I'm just going to mark that out here. The details of their love story, really. Moving on to the final stanza. Can't believe we've gotten here so quickly. The stars are not wanted now. Put out every one. Wow, this is even going further in absurdity. Pretty hyperbolic. How are we to achieve this? Let's move on. Pack up the moon and dismantle the sun. So we're returning to that earlier commanding, that imperative tone. And we're getting our imperatives coming through again as well. So I'm going to mark those out for us once more. Put out, pack up, dismantle, pour away, sweep up. This is a singling out of aspects of nature which would symbolize love. The moon, the stars, they're dreamy and full of love. The sun, the light of love, that is. So, with death, that bringing the end of love, there would no longer be any need for the stars. His beloved has died, so too has these symbols of love to him, of course, only. So the moon and stars will mean nothing to him now. It's almost as if they don't exist. He wants them to be replaced by darkness. He wants the world to be plunged into total darkness. That's the only thing that would suit his current mood and that depression that he's experienced at the death of his love. Moving on, line 15. Pour away the ocean and sweep up the woods. Again, very hyperbolic. Desire to alter the way the universe works. For nothing now can ever come to any good. So the ocean and woods represent again this beauty, this purity of nature, which is so appreciated, especially when people are in love. Perhaps they would then frequent these isolated places in nature and recognize the beauty of their surroundings whilst in that state of euphoria brought about by being in the presence of their love. So he continues to ask for something quite impossible, and the oceans and wood would represent the land and the sea. He wants it all to disappear, all to go away. Everything should come to an end. Now, what's questionable here is this authentic? Is this sincere? Being this hyperbolic and extreme, is this not coming off as being pretentious, perhaps, or sarcastic? But really, in my personal view, this shows a very intense grief and despair. He's so saddened by this that he wants to inflict his pain upon the greater universe. In the word woods, there is a semicolon which focuses on the idea that when we die, love dies. It kind of creates that sense of finality here. So there's definitely pessimism in the speaker. He doesn't believe in the transcendence of love into death or life after death. So there's a great sense of grief and a very pessimistic view of the future. Nothing now can come to any good. There's going to be ongoing suffering, and it's all very gloomy. In the final stanza, of course, you'll notice, as I've marked out our imperatives, these are much more flippant imperatives. I've pointed out our hyperbole, which is very important. Now then, let's look at the poem on the whole. What you'll notice with our rhyme scheme is we've got pretty much a consistent rhyme scheme, A, A, B, B, C, C, D, D, continuing that way throughout. And that creates quite an interesting effect in that these heroic couplets highlight how daily life goes on for those unaffected by the loss suffered here, this death continue very unaffected and very normal, a mundane day for them. So it shows how time will be consistent and life will continue, and there'll be consistency in that, in spite of this event of seismic proportions for one person occurring. Also, it creates elegate stanzas, which contributes to the sadness of it all. In terms of rhythm and going back to our original elegy, in terms of the title, what you'll notice is that where our rhyme scheme is really consistent, we do have metrical variation coming in within each of the lines in these stanzas. So that draws our attention to different aspects of the lines and the wording and creates some form of disorder and chaos in these otherwise perfectly rhyming stanzas. So that shows the chaos going on in the singular person's life as they deal with the death of their great love. And with that, I just want to draw your attention to the final stanza, where I seem to have failed to have marked out that this is drawing us to a universal scale. And unfortunately, where this speaker goes right to the universal stage, they still fail to believe in the transcendence of love. So the loss of love here is final, and really, this grief may cause one to lose their zest for life entirely. So it's definitely a story for a good old rhythm and blues song. Quickly drifting into tone, we definitely see changes in tone coming through, going from very commanding to more nostalgic, irrational, perhaps a little bit cynical as well. But throughout, we do see the intense grief coming through and a sense of bitterness and sorrow. The message or central idea of this poem is definitely a poignant expression of grief, memory, devastation, and longing. An expression of grief that goes beyond words into silence. Life definitely becomes pointless to this person when their loved one dies. And thus, the speaker wants everything to come to a standstill as life is meaningless because his loved one has died. And that's it for this one. Hope you've enjoyed. Remember to engage in the comments, and we'll see you next time.